Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be installing a Perfex Industries 2-inch lift kit on the 800EX Cfmoto. I know a lot of people end up installing the Razor lift kit, and I actually did purchase that before. I just felt more comfortable going with one that was specifically designed for it. I've already gone through the instructions that come with this lift. They're pretty straightforward, doesn't look too hard, but we're going to get into it and show you some video. The first thing we need to do is get the front end jacked up until the tires come off the ground. Once they're off, we're going to remove both tires and then disconnect the lower shock mounts on the A-arm. There's also a bracket for your brake line that we're going to be removing and relocating onto the new bracket. Okay, once you have your wheel and tire off, you're going to want to disconnect this bolt right here. You're going to need a 15mm socket and a 15mm wrench. This is the bracket for your brake line you need to remove. You got a 10mm. If you struggle to get that bolt out, just grab your A-arm and lift up on it, and you should be able to take the tension off enough to slide it out. So you want to figure out the appropriate bracket for each side. So as you'll see, you'll have two with a bent lip right here, and you'll have two that are flat. So the bent edge will go on the front of the A-arm. So on the side that has one tab, that's the side that will have the beveled bracket. On the back side, you'll have a straight bracket. So from there, you'll line it up right there and go ahead and bolt it in. So next is put your first bolt through. So you'll put one of the 65mm bolts, a spacer, then a lock nut. So you'll put one of the two smaller bolts right here with a washer and lock nut. When you're putting the washer on, make sure you look at the size. As you can see, the one in the middle is thick. The other two are thin. So you're only going to have two thin ones. The rest are going to be heavy washers. Once you have your new bolts in, the large one is still going to be a 15mm. This one's going to be 17. Go ahead and tighten them up. Okay, so when you first get the two brackets on, go ahead and tighten that one up immediately. Leave this one semi-loose. You're going to have to get one of the long bolts that come in the kit with two heavy washers in between the bracket and the shock. So it's kind of a pain. You want to leave a little bit of slack to work with. I took a pry bar and put it here and just put some pressure up to get it lined up. If you can't do that, you may have to take some tension out of your springs. That way you can get it lined up. So once you have all the bolts in, go ahead and suck them all down and tighten them up. The next step is remounting your brake line. You'll use the stock bolt that came out of it, and then you'll get one of these little nuts in your kit. So go ahead and put that on there, tighten it up, and then you're ready to move on to your next side. Alright, so now we got the brackets on both sides. So now you're ready to go ahead and put your wheels and tires back on and let it down. Probably a good idea while you have it off, your tires and wheels off and have easy access, go ahead and grease everything. So now moving on to the rear, we're going to be disconnecting the top of the shocks instead of the bottom. So go ahead and disconnect both sides. From there, you're going to have to come down here and you have to disconnect your e-brake cable and remove this bracket, and they give you a new bracket to relocate this. Okay, so when you're disconnecting your e-brake cable, you'll loosen this nut. It is a 12mm, so go ahead and loosen it all the way. You're going to have to release this from this lever right here. I found the easiest way to do this is take a longer screwdriver, stick it up in there, and you can kind of crank it back enough to get that off. Once you have that off, move this out of the way, and you're going to remove these two bolts that are 14mm. So once you have the stock bracket off, go ahead and replace it with one of the brackets that they provide. Make sure you have the right side. Go ahead and hook it back up, and then you'll need to re-hook up the cable. Same thing again, just use a screwdriver to torque this back to where you can get that over. Once you're done with that, just repeat it for the other side, and then you'll start on the cross member. So now we got our brakes, our e-brake completely rehooked up. We're going to move on to doing the cross member brackets. If you have the 1000, there's an additional step where you have to shim a exhaust plate, but that step is not needed on the 800. So we're going to go ahead and mount up the two drop brackets for this cross member. They'll basically go on each side of it with the spacer in between. So we'll go ahead and get that mounted up now. So your brackets are slightly different shaped. So going off of this diagram, this one right here is going to be on the back, so the cab side. This is going to go on the front towards the rear end. So before you go mounting the brackets, you're going to want to remove this for now. We could probably get it back in there once we're done, but this is a wire to your O2 sensor, but we're going to need to get that out of the way. So if you're following the instructions, and if you happen to have a 21 800, it says that you should not have this shield over your exhaust on the 800s compared to the 1000s, but on a 21 I do have it. So what I'm gonna have to do is remove this bolt. They then provide you with a heavy washer for a spacer, so you're gonna need to remove it, slide that in there to space it out so you can fit your bracket. On the exhaust shroud, I ended up actually just removing all 4 bolts and sliding it back. Made it a lot easier. So you got 2 here, and there'll be 2 that bolt in back here. So I just have it slid back right now. On this pigtail for your O2 sensor, the only thing you need to do is just disconnect it right there. You don't actually have to pull this mounting out. So once you have that all done, you can go ahead and tighten up your bolts. Not all the way, because you want to leave enough space to where you can get your heavy washers in when you remount your shocks. So now we got our bolts, the heavy washers through our shock mounts. It's just finger tight right now. These aren't completely tight either, so now you can go back through, tighten up the bracket mounts, tighten this back up, reattach your exhaust shroud, put your cover back on, and once again, good idea to go ahead and grease all your zerts while you're in here. Another thing I didn't mention on the front is while you have everything off, it's probably a good idea just to make sure that all your nuts and bolts for your control arms and everything are tight. They're kind of notorious for coming loose, especially if you haven't checked it since you bought it. So an issue I ran into when I was just hooking everything back up is this O2 sensor pigtail was mounted up here in the original cross member. There wasn't enough wire to reconnect it, so what I had to do was get that bracket out of that hole. All you gotta do is just get up inside here with a long pair of needle nose pliers, squeeze the end, and it'll pull right out. So then I reconnected it and I just zip tied it into one of the holes on the new bracket. Install for the Perfex Industries 2-inch bracket lift kit. Once you have your lift kit in, if you don't need all 2 inches, you can let some preload out of your springs and it will adjust your height, soften your ride a little bit, all end up letting about 1/2 inch to 1 inch out. I have a link down in the description to Perfex Industries, and it has a 10% off discount. If you guys have any questions or comments, let us know. Thanks for watching.